So welcome to another Conversations for a Better World, our community discussion and exploration evenings. And our guest tonight is Jay Stevens, the eye and will to walk again. Over to you, Jay.
Thank you very much, Robin. Thank you, team. Thanks very much for coming, guys. It was really nice to meet you all. And so, first of all, I'll probably just give a quick little breakdown of what I'm going to chat about tonight. So I was just going to start to give a bit of background, obviously, about myself, which will obviously then give context to the journey that I've had in relearning to walk again. I'll touch base on why I was in Uluru and up the sky in a helicopter that fell out of the sky. Obviously the journey after having a spinal cord injury, going through hospitals, the legal system, which I had a lot of wrangling with, the rehab journey, the work that I've done. It's called Emdr Work, which is eye movement desensitization reprogramming. It's a type of psychology work which has been pretty much groundbreaking for opening up, being able to remember the crash, and obviously that's then led into certainly new ways of me tackling learning how to walk again. And an interesting one which has kind of come up to finish off, it's called embracing the dark side. It's an interesting one. I don't know if you've heard of Michael Jordan's trainer. His name's Tim Grover, and obviously I've read a few of his books lately, and there was a fair few points that resonated, especially with the long journey to relearning to walk again. There's no such thing as talent in a spinal cord injury and relearning to walk, so it's all about hard work, and there's a lot of examples which I'll probably finish off with there. So a bit of background: I'm 37 years old, grew up out in Castle Hill, and obviously family heritage, my parents are from New Zealand. I'm part Māori, and I've got a lovely wife and two young kids, Kai and Tane. Kai is 6 and Tane is 3.5, so as you can understand, they keep me busy in a wheelchair at home, but also when I'm walking around as well. So sporting background sport was pretty prolific when I was younger, to obviously get my energy out. Lots of multiple sports when you're young, but then that kind of all formulated into track and field. That was my main love. A lot of the track and field, I think it was done as an escape to get out of home. And that track and field was middle distance running. Ended up having a pretty successful career when I was young. I came second in Australia in the Australian Junior Champs. They were under 20s. And a lot of the fundamentals and stuff that I learnt when I was young there has obviously paved the way in the recovery as well. So while I was in Uluru, I worked as a medical device sales professional. So I'd always be selling implants, drills, all the parts and the carpentry that surgeons need to do to pick your body apart. I was selling them. And funnily enough, I was dealing with neurosurgeons and spine surgeons at the time. And that was why I was in Uluru. So we had our work conference in Uluru, and the top salespeople within the company were gifted with helicopter flights up around the rock in the afternoon. And the people who obviously had higher sales numbers were towards the end of the afternoon. So I was towards the end because then you got the better flight with the sunset flight. So we pulled up to the helicopter pad. Obviously, everyone was fairly excited. It's a crazy juxtaposition of what's about to come. But it's funny looking back now, because obviously we pulled up, everyone was fairly excited. And as we've gone in, you had to get weighed, of course, to get on your helicopters. And when I first got on the scales, I can remember this for about word for word. I was about 105 kilograms at the time, which I knew that off by heart. And when I got weighed in, it said 92. And not knowing anything about helicopters and weights, I kind of cracked a joke. I said to the guy next to me, one of my work colleagues, I said, my wife's going to be pretty happy with those numbers. I can remember it word for word. And then, of course, you went down and waited for your flight. So obviously we got ushered out to our flight. It was pretty rushed. So obviously other people came out. We ran in. You're running under the blades that are still spinning, because I think we were pretty rushed. We were meant to get to a dinner, so it was pretty fast paced. In the helicopter, obviously you just take a quick little photo here and there. And one of the main things I remember is obviously I had my phone out, and I've got the footage now, and of course I've watched it a million times. I've had to submit it as evidence. And when you get into the helicopter, of course you're excited. So the main things we're looking around and taking in the scenery, and obviously with work colleagues, so you're fairly excited. I had the phone on when we were taking off, and you didn't really get to hear that much because you wear the headphones when you're in the helicopter. But the video footage, as we're going up, an alarm just goes off immediately. And we couldn't really hear that because we had the headphones on, and of course you're excited, and I'm just filming. So I'm filming that, but I'm looking at the side and just trying to take it all in rather than just sitting there looking at a phone. As we took off, the helicopter took off, the alarm started immediately. The alarm was a low RPM, so as soon as we took off, the helicopter had low power to the propellers, and that's of course the pilot's job to manage that. Took off, nothing was really fixed or diagnosed or anything done about it. So obviously we've taken off and we've turned around and done a U-turn. So the main thing to do when those propellers, if you've got low power to the propellers, you don't have any extra power, so you need to manage the blades. So if you've got low power, you just flatten them and hover because there's less wind resistance when they're flat. Unfortunately, the pilot has just panicked a bit and climbed, so he's actually angled them more. So instead of getting more power back by just hovering, he's tilted them up. So unfortunately, the higher we got, the more power the helicopter had. And unbeknownst to us, we're sitting out there, look, everything was fine. So we got up to about 120 metres high. And you can remember, we're in the helicopter. I'm fairly good in high pressure situations. Obviously, like learning to surf big waves, breath holds and some other situations. So fairly comfortable in high pressure situations with the fight or flight response. So you could feel the helicopter, it started shaking. And I was like, oh, turbulence, similar to a plane. Obviously, I'd only been on a helicopter once. And I was just like, oh yeah, a bit of turbulence. And kept going. And then there was a bigger one, I'm talking big, my head was nearly hitting the roof. You're like, oh shit, this is, hang on, this is starting to get a little bit bad. But I still was kind of calm. And then you kind of knew something was wrong. Then you could hear just the sputtering, like that da 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 da. You're like, oh, that's not good. And the shaking got worse and worse. And the shaking is actually the helicopter stalling. So unbeknownst to us, of course, obviously it's sitting there stalling. And I said to Robin, there's kind of two parts. There was like your conscious mind and your unconscious mind when you're in that helicopter. So the unconscious is obviously your fight or flight. So, swearing, you're like, oh shit, there's something bad going on. Conscious mind, it's kind of like I'm talking to you here right now. It's like I was sitting there like exactly what we are right now, and your conscious mind, if you could extrapolate the sentences of kind of what you're thinking rapid fire, it was like, no. You're kind of like, no. You're like, this thing's going down, and you're just like kind of like looking out the window, and it's like it was going, one part was going fast and one part was going slow. And it wasn't until, because a lot of the stuff I couldn't remember until I did all the Emdr work. And I remembered one night, that was probably one of the things I remembered, was just sitting there. Obviously it was happening so fast. If you know the feeling, when you're driving a car and you lose control quickly, just that fight or flight response, but it was like that, but for 25 seconds. So just that fear response, but you couldn't get anything out of your mouth because you know nothing about helicopters. You're not you can't just pull the car over. You're 120 metres up in the ground. So, like I said, all the fight or flight things that are just coming up, and you're just like, And then, of course, you kind of had that, had the conscious mind just kind of just having those little talks. You're just like, no, you're like, oh shit, this is happening. And of course that got worse and worse, so it stalled and pretty much, we fell out of the sky. And going down, you kind of, like I said, fight or flight, of course you've just got those emotions there that are just those fear responses. And I said to a friend the other day, it was just like when I was walking around the lake, he asked a few questions about it. And it was so weird because you're sitting there, you're on something, you're like, because I said that, that you had that 20 seconds of that, so you kind of had a little bit of time to think. And of course, the first thing that came up was, my kids. But then that conscious sentencing that was going on, or the dialogue in my head is like, oh, fuck, I'm going out this way. That was, in summary, you're just like, fuck, this is how I'm going to go out. And just having that thought, it was like you're in a straitjacket in a room and someone's dropping the room from, 120 metres up in the sky. Like, you could not do a thing to help or anything. The pilot was essentially doing nothing. Like, everything that he was meant to do, we found out afterwards he did wrong. So he did the opposite of what was required to fix that situation. And it was so weird being there because you're just sitting there. It was kind of like, if you just have like a ghost, and he was like, he wasn't communicating with us. There was no reassurance, no safety or anything. He was just, I think he just froze essentially. And it was so weird sitting there because you're waiting for at least something to happen, at least to say brace, brace, brace or something. But, just nothing. He's just like, oh, we're going down. It's like I said, it's just utter shock. So you had those feelings there. There was that one just before, before we're going down, you're like, oh, shit, I'm going to go out this way. And of course you think of your kids. And just before it hit the ground, like I said, you had that 20 to 25 second window of just, just pure fear. But I can remember just before it hit the ground, there was kind of just something, like one more extra thought that came. And it's funny, after I've done a bit of work on this, like I said, I mentioned that dark side at the start. When I'm in stressful situations, long walks, it's a lot of pain and that now, you kind of have to joke about things a little bit to navigate your way through them, because panicking is not going to get you anywhere. So you're essentially just negotiating with yourself in a funny way. I can remember just before it hit the ground, I think I just said to myself quickly, I'm like, oh, this one's going to hurt here, buckle up, kind of thing. Just like, effing hold on here. It's your best shot kind of thing. Just before it hit, because you're meant to brace, so you're meant to go down, like down to your head in your knees. Obviously, we didn't get told that because he just, nothing was coming out of him. So I think I remember I just grabbed as hard as I could in front and obviously just brace. So that was the last thing I thought before I hit the ground, was just like, hold on here, boy. It's going to be a rough one. And obviously crashed into the red earth, and helicopters rolled down the sand dune. And luckily, the pilot and I got it the worst because I was behind him, and I think it's landed on the right, and then we've rolled down to the left. But luckily, because we've landed on the right, the passenger next to me, a work colleague, he only had a concussion. So he was luckily able to extract us and pull us out, because there's all fuel and stuff dripping all over us within the helicopter. So it was lucky that he was able to pull us out. And so, of course, we got out, and then you're just sitting there. I think this is obviously all the stuff I've been able to remember after the Emdr work. And it was kind of like, when you have a dream and, if like you fall off something and you wake up quick, it was kind of like you're just sitting there, laying there, because obviously I'd broken my back. I think I'd broken like 8 ribs, sternum was broken, hips were broken. So I couldn't move, I couldn't breathe very well. So you're just like trying to because you're laying there, and I was like, I couldn't move. And then obviously it's real hard to breathe. So you're just like, and then it's like you're kind of just waiting to wake up. That was the crazy thing. You're like, come on now. And then, so yeah, we're laying there. Another helicopter came out after about maybe 10 minutes, and all they had was honestly a lunch pack. of first aid supplies. Like they were so unprepared. There hadn't really been a crash there before, so I think they just were immune to something like that happening. So they're coming out with a little lunch bag of honestly, a little first aid bag, one of those little ones that you see someone unzips and there's wound kits in there. And so there was barely anything in there, and I couldn't have anything, no pain relief or anything, because my blood pressure was so low. So obviously you had a fair bit of time to think there. And again, it was similar thought patterns to when you were going down in the helicopter, but it was like, one of the main things you kind of remember was just like, everything's changed. Like now, you're just like laying there, you're just like, nothing's going to be the same again. I think that was, in summary, the collection of thoughts was you just like, oh shit, everything's changed. You knew, working in medical, you knew how serious it was. I knew I couldn't move my legs, I couldn't feel them. And obviously I knew they were broken because I was wheezing when I was breathing, I had bruised lungs with blood all in them and stuff. So it was an interesting time there on the ground. And like I said, that thought where you're just sitting there and you're just going, everything's changed. It's kind of like a million thoughts just trying to get into a one-lane freeway. Because you think of your kids, obviously can't surf, can't run, can't be with my wife, can't do ABC. It's all coming at you real quick, and then of course that just turns into panic. And you start thinking, am I going to obviously get through this? Am I going to die here? And that probably started off for about 10 minutes. You're starting to get really worked up a bit because you're laying there, you can't move. So essentially you've just got this freeway of scary thoughts, fight or flight response just firing off, and you're just like laying there but you can't move. And that's just the crazy thing. I can just remember just like laying there, it's like you're looking around and you're like, you can't really speak properly because you're wheezing. And I think it kind of got to a point, obviously I said I was fairly good with fight or flight and stressful situations. I kind of just managed to calm myself down, and I was just like, okay, you're in a bit of shit here. Things have really gone against you, but I was still breathing. I think I just broke it down to its simplest multiple. I'm still breathing. That was probably number one. And doing a breath hold course and doing some free diving and surfing big waves, you know how to control those situations. It's ditch everything, relax, breathe, and you're under. So I kind of just took on a lot of those exercises as well. Just the only thing I could pretty much control there was breathing. So I was just like, okay, let's just simplify it down to that. And gradually you start wrestling control back. You're in fight or flight there before, and the more you just you're taking control back, second by second, minute by minute, hour by hour, and using those breathing techniques. I started trying to talk to people around me, just to obviously just keep myself busy, keep myself away from falling off a cliff and panic and making it a lot worse for myself, because my blood pressure was pretty low already. And the craziest thing is, as we were laying there, the helicopter company, it was essentially us and them. After that happened, it was commercial interests above anything else. So they've flown in a helicopter, a normal helicopter, not a medical helicopter, and they've taken away their own pilot, and we're laying there, and you're just sitting there. I'm just like, hang on, what's going on here? And they flew their own pilot out, and we're just sitting here just going. And I'd had other people that managed to come out from work. Some people had managed to get to the crash site, and essentially, they were asking questions. They got stonewalled, and so, like I said, they were in damage control. As soon as that thing hit the ground, it was commercial interests above anything else. It was pretty much us and them. So, we're laying there. Obviously, I can't move with a spinal cord injury, just laying there. He had a similar injury to myself, and so he got flown out by their own helicopter. And like I said, it's just a surreal feeling. Like I said, you're waiting for that dream to just stop. And so I had to wait out there for about 3 hours, and there was snakes crawling near us. There was people like stamping next to us. So the snakes, there was like thousands of ants all over us. Obviously, it was Ayers Rock. So obviously the terrain, and snakes and ants. Obviously I had thousands of ant bites all over me when I was in the hospital. Obviously my wife was obviously trying to ooze them, you know, they're all obviously came up all pimply and stuff the next day. So we're there for 3 hours, and finally some ambulance guys got to us over the dunes in their 4-wheel drive medic van, and then I got lifted into that, obviously with a spinal cord injury, and driven out over the dunes. So we all got back to the medical centre there, and I think they'd called the flying doctors. So they had 2 planes come in, and we're all there laying there, and the helicopter pilot got flown down to Adelaide for emergency surgery. I stayed with my work colleagues, and we got flown to Ayers Rock, and they got, not Ayers Rock, sorry, is it Ayers Rock? Alice Springs, there we go, yeah, I'm getting mixed up. It's all blending into one. So we got flown to Alice Springs, and you know, I think I had the whistle and stuff by then, so I think I was, and obviously me dealing with the pain, I was just quiet. And I think the major deciding factor was the pilot was like screaming, yelling, barking, and I'd gone the other way. I just knew that wasn't going to serve me in any way, sitting there yelling. It's not really my personality like that either. So I was just there quiet, and I was just like breathing. Pilot got flown to Adelaide for emergency surgery that night. I got flown to Alice Springs, and I think they were still under the impression that I didn't have a spinal cord injury, even though I was saying my back. They've tried to load me into a CT machine to get some images, and I couldn't lay properly because obviously my back was broken, and they kept trying to get me in and out to get the images. And obviously I know how the machines work because I'd sold hospital equipment in a previous role. So that was kind of when I snapped. Then I started screaming. I was saying, guys, you know, it's a lot more serious kind of than what you think, because I think I was just a little bit drugged out. And obviously I was keeping real quiet because, you know, the only one who's going to control this is me until something happens, until I get surgery or something. So they couldn't even get the images because they kept putting me in, putting me out, and I couldn't lay straight to get the images. So eventually I got flown down to Adelaide the next day and got on the table about 30 hours after having the accident. They say usually with a spinal cord you want to reduce it, which is get it fixated and put back in place within 24 hours for the best recovery possible. Somehow I found myself there 30 hours later on the table. So eventually it got done, and surgery was done, and yeah, woke up the next day, and it was kind of weird in Adelaide because I was on so much pain relief. It was all a bit of a blur. And I guess one of the things that I can remember was the actual helicopter company coming into my rooms, because I had the video, and you know, that was the smoking gun essentially, because the alarm and everything was going off in the video. So they've actually come in under the guise of, you know, goodwill, and we're here to investigate, we're here just to find out what went wrong. So the hospital journey after that, obviously Alice Springs, Adelaide, I had the surgery there. So I was out in Adelaide for about 3 weeks, and I think just the shock of, you were locked to a bed. Obviously the morning of, I was there, I did an 8-kilometre run around in the morning, and you know, active lifestyle. I think the crazy thing is just to be like snap your fingers, boom, you're locked in a bed. Ended up getting transferred up to Sydney, and I think that's when it really started to kick in. Obviously I was in Royal North Shore for about another 6 weeks, and just, you know, you don't have your bladder, you don't have your bowels. You had to get back into your bed, you needed to be lifted, put across and dropped in. Just all those simple things, obviously just taken. And obviously I think the big thing was you got to see other spinal cord injuries and that as well. And seeing some other guys that were worse off than me, of course, you know, you can get your bearings pretty quickly, but still, personally, it's just an overwhelming experience to just pretty much have all your bodily functions, flick of an eye, gone. And I understand each level up the spinal cord you go, you lose one more piece of your body that's not working. So moving on to the court case, a confronting example actually. I remembered when I was at the hospital, because I could feel when my bladder was full, but it obviously they just empty it because it was in the bag, but I could always feel when it was full. And so I was under the impression, I'm like, okay, I can feel when this is full. So I went to the toilet one day, they pulled the catheter out, and I can remember being in the bathroom. I'm just like, oh, yes, I finally get to do a wee. And, you know, I was sitting there, like, it's so great what you get excited for, just, you know, basic bodily functions that you just take for granted. And I can remember sitting in the toilet, I was busting to go, and I was sitting there, and I could feel myself, so it came down, and then it just stopped, because there's actually a muscle that actually has to release to obviously let it out. And I didn't have that muscle, but I could feel everything. So I could feel how full I was, ready to go to the bathroom. I could feel everything pretty much coming about to come out, and then it just stopped. And I was waiting, and then like nothing came. And I think that's when having something, just such a simple thing, but it's the little simple things that you take for granted, that, you know, they're just daily functions. I think that was one that kind of really kind of hit me in the guts there. So I was at Royal North Shore Hospital, and then obviously I got transferred out to a spinal rehab facility. The hardest part for that was I had an 18-month-old at home, and just spending 6 months, it was a quarter of his life, I was away from him. And, you know, I was hands-on, real hands-on. We'd have a running pram on the lake, and we'd go every morning together. So that was my medicine with him. So being away from your little one for a quarter of their life at that point, you know, I was 18 months old. So that was, I know that was real pain, like ache. You know, that was just aching pain. And I think probably I'll touch on the physio journey of the hospitals and stuff a little bit later on, because there was some interesting things that I found through that journey. It was more my headspace versus the conventional treatment model of spinal cord injuries. I like to push the envelope a lot. And of course, you know, it's a pretty much it's not, I'm just trying to think of the right wording for it. You know, it's management rather than, you know, trying to push the envelope for maximum results. And, you know, that didn't sit well with me. Obviously, I've got a pretty driven personality, and it obviously rubbed a few people the wrong way, but I don't care. I'm here standing, so it doesn't worry me. So, yeah, the court case, we had the governing body is called the ATSB, the Australian Transport Safety Bureau, and they were pretty much in charge of running the whole case. And it was a long, drawn-out process because we had COVID, and I knew everything that went on that day. And, you know, it was a very long process, which was definitely in favour of the operators. And to get the final report, you're not allowed to say anything directly, but I think these two sentences that were verbatim in the report was for the weighing scales. Obviously, I was weighed in at 92 kilograms. I was 105. I've got the medical records, obviously, to prove that. And the ATSB recommendation was a calibration setting for the operator's scales. And has anyone ever heard of a calibration setting for scales? You know, it should be done every day. And the other one, in regards to the pilot with the low RPM alarm, it said, you know, if the pilot had applied, you know, full throttle after hearing the alarm, it was likely to be recovered. A simple fix for that flight to obviously recover the power and obviously keep us going. And unfortunately, he didn't do that, which led to us crashing. One thing I did find with the rehab journey was, like I said, it was weird. After I had the crash, I kind of always just had that youthful optimism of just like, righto, let's get on with it kind of thing. You know, when you hear someone and they say they start their business, they're like, far out, if I had known what I know now, I would never have started. But they said the thing that got them there was just that youthful optimism of, you know, just having their own business. It was the same thing with walking for me. I just was not there to accept it. And pivotal moment was when I was in the hospital bed in Adelaide, and they told me, they started trying to run through everything like that. I said, just stop. I just said, can you just tell me if it's complete or incomplete? That's all I need to know. And he said, it's incomplete. And then he started to say this. I said, just, that's it. That's all I need to know. Thank you. You know, anything else other was just it was just noise. And why would I want to know anything more if it was incomplete? So I didn't look at my pre-op notes, pre-operation notes for 4 years. And I took a look at them this year once I started really getting some strong momentum walking, because by that time my head was right. And it wasn't until when I looked at the notes, especially the spinal cord injury, it was, spinal cord was crushed 16 mils in with 5 mil gap left, so 75%. And if I had had that floating around in my head, every single rep, every single walk, everything like that, there's no way I'd be in a position like I am now, because like I said, it was just noise, and it was just unwanted noise. So I was pretty happy that I did it that way, and obviously the results speak. Like, I shouldn't be here walking around standing up. I was lucky enough to complete 10 kilometres around the lake on the weekend where I saw Robin, and yeah, you just sit there, it's about possibility, especially with spinal cord injuries. Like I said, a lot of people don't tap into that enough, and it was probably one thing that I found on the rehab journey was that I was fighting against a lot of people. Like I said, it's a management system. It's not a, accelerate your rehab and see how far you can get system. So of course, going through the rehab at Ryde, I was given physio straight out of university. And of course, it's not their fault, but the questions I was asking, coming from a medical background, I was just getting stonewalled with the evidence says. And the first thing I'd always say is, I just said, I'm not the effing evidence. I was a little bit forward with it, but you kind of have to be. It's your own rehab, and to get back up walking again, you can't really accept anything less than what you want. And coming out of Ryde, it's a very narrow system with all allied health. Everyone knows who everyone is, so everyone's passing each other business. And probably one of the things that I did find was that, especially on the physio side and the exercise physiology side, when you're in that insurance setting and the spinal rehab setting, like I said, it's easy business. And one thing that I did find, I was working with accomplished physios, but probably, this is only my personal opinion of the people that I was dealing with, but I found it was more of a business model for them. They'd lost the one-to-one, what you are as a physio and they've moved on to, they're a business people now with multiple clients. And I felt that. And so that was why I kind of just took it into my own hands. I scrapped all the physios and I just got in some of my own physios, and we were just doing different stuff. And a lot of the stuff that we were doing, all I could move was my hips. That's all I had. So a lot of the time I'd just try and lay on my back on little balancing blocks, because you need to just get that extra feedback. If you're laying flat on the ground, you're not going to get, because it's just flat, solid. But balancing on the blocks and trying to keep your hips together, just little things like that. I was just trying to think outside the box a lot of the time. And look, it's worked. And it kind of ruffled a few feathers. And I think I may have lost a few allied health therapists along the way. But like I said, the results are here. And like I said, it allows you to kind of just, you build more self-confidence in what you are doing and where you're kind of going along the whole journey. So an interesting part of this journey has been the psychology side of things. It's called EMDR. So it's eye movement desensitization reprogramming. So I don't know if you've seen when people sleep, you can see their eyes are fluttering a little bit. That's when you do your memory processing. And of course, if you've got a traumatic memory, you've only got a picture and a quick, you've got a really fight or flight response. So there was little parts that I could remember when I was in the crash. The main one was that feeling just before I hit the ground of, buckle up here and hold on. Obviously I'm going out here, just that one, but it was just that split second, and of course, the fight or flight response. But doing the EMDR, like I said, a lot of the memory processing is done when you're in that REM sleep. So he actually sits there in front of you and he moves his fingers in front of your eyes to essentially mimic that same state. So, you know, we started small and he'd ask you to just try and anchor in a memory of what you could out there that afternoon. And if it was a traumatic one, he'd move his fingers in front of your face, you know, quite fast. So the faster the fingers were moving, the more traumatic the memory was. And I can't explain, obviously, what's going on at a neurological level, but I just know that it works. And so, you know, obviously I'd anchor in a memory. And one that I have anchored in was obviously when the helicopter was going down, like I explained to you, the things that I was thinking. And doing the EMDR, he moves his fingers in front of your face like that. And when I can anchor into that memory, it's like I'm sitting down next to myself in the helicopter right here, right now, and you're talking to yourself in third person. And you're essentially, like we're talking here now, you're just like, okay, it's Jay from 3 years later. You're all right. Number one, you live. Number two, you've had a second son that's come along the way. Family's going good. You're up walking again. And obviously you keep doing that multiple times and it just softens it. And there's plenty of memories that day that I've had to go into each individual one. And, you know, you're pretty much just talking yourself through it. And, you know, another one was when I'm obviously laying on the ground. Like I said, all those thoughts were coming through. And, you know, when I've been doing, because I do a bit of it at home by myself too, obviously to just get better with it and get those memories out in a more processed way. And one of the ways that I thought of through was with obviously my walking sticks and walking up to myself. So this is essentially me sitting down on the ground, obviously laying there, and we're just talking like we are right now. Saying, again, similar sentences, you're just like, yep, you know, you kind of joke about it. Obviously the way I deal with high pressure, I joke about it. I'm like, geez, bit of a tough one here today, aren't you? And obviously you kind of just, like I said, you're softening those traumatic memories out and out. And, you know, it's taken years, but I've been able to remember more and more parts of it. You know, it's not a traumatic memory now, it's, you know, it's a sequential memory. I'm sitting here telling you about it play by play. And so having that as a therapy has been a bit of a game changer for me. And the final thing I was going to touch on was obviously the dark side. When I was young, obviously I had a fair bit of energy when I was younger, and there was a bit of violence in the household, and, you know, sometimes some physical and mental abuse. And there was probably one of the big things that stuck out to me. I had a rage inside. Like I saw a lot of anger, but I never saw a productive vessel to use it in until I had sport. And that was probably one of the obviously the best vessels to get out, but it was more of an escape back then. So the more time I spent away from home, the more time I didn't have to be there. So it was more and more exercise. And, you know, tapping into that, I actually got a message from a friend after I had the accident. I used to play soccer with him when I was like 13 or 14. And he actually recounted a story to me, which I couldn't even remember myself. We had he was an ex-Navy sergeant or something. He was in the Navy in some capacity in a high role. And we were only 13 at the time and we were a soccer team, but he was trying to coach us. Like, he was just sergeant major. And of course, you know, the dark side in that, I just rebelled against that. But the story that he did say, it was just like, oh, I remember we were all at soccer one night. It was a cold, rainy night like it is tonight. And he said, oh, you were playing around as the leader of the uprising. And he stopped and made you do extra sprints in front of the whole team. And I knew the guy. I've just had that defiance from being young and some experiences I had when I was a kid. And he was the perfect embodiment of that. And I think he set up, it was some sprints up and back and down the park, and I had to do it in a set time, which he didn't think I'd get it. I ended up getting it, and I looked at him afterwards and I smiled, but he recounted the story to me. And it wasn't until he said it, and he was just like, oh, you know, I was impressed by that sort of grit and toughness. And it wasn't until someone kind of phrased it that way, because I'd never seen a productive vessel for, you know, that anger. You know, you see CEOs, and a lot of the top CEOs, you know, they've got traits of a psychopath, because a lot of those characteristics, you know, they're rewarded. And coming from the background that I had, I'd never really seen a productive use of that, so it was always repressed. It had come out in sport in certain situations, but I was in medical device sales, and the only way that I felt I could use it there was a people pleaser. That was what my mum was. And so when you're getting financially remunerated for being a people pleaser, of course it generally strengthens those characteristics. And there's old mate, a bit of anger over there, which is just, pushed to the side. And it wasn't until, obviously, I got a message like that, and I started doing a bit of reading myself, because, like I said, from the start, as soon as I got on the train for this rehab journey, I was always kind of had my middle finger up in a rude kind of way, but it was kind of the way that I did it, and it's worked out. And, it kind of just got me thinking, that message. And it wasn't until I read a book. It was by Michael Jordan's trainer. His name's Tim Grover. And he said, everyone's biggest gift is their dark side. And I was just like, that's pretty interesting, because I've always known that there's something inside me when I'm walking. I actually enjoy it because it's so painful. It is not enjoyable at all. Like, it's not like you can get to go for a nice stroll. Like, everything's out of whack. Some muscles are weak. I get really bad nerve pain. But for some reason, I've always liked just that. I've liked the pain cave and going for long walks and stuff, and just the grind. I don't know if you could describe it as any other way. And it's always generally had to be physical, but it's a vessel for it to come out. It wasn't coming out in my professional career, but I've pretty much had a vessel for it to come out within this rehab journey, because, like I said, it's relentless. It's a fuel that will never stop. It'll never leave. And to have a vessel like a spinal cord injury to recover from, I think I probably found a fairly good vessel for it to come out in. And probably the biggest thing, recovering from the injury, like at the start, I didn't go too much into all the evidence and the science and stuff, because, like I said, that's just too much white noise in your head. When all you want to do is learn to walk again, I just like to keep it simple and just focus on my own visualization rather than reading journal articles. And like I said, that's why I didn't want to read my medical notes, because why would I need to know my spinal cord was crushed 80%? It was not going to serve me in any way, shape or form. So at the start of the rehab journey, I was just sitting there. You think that you need to add more things in together. You're like, oh, should I be doing this? Should I be doing that? And should I be thinking this way, that way? And I think I mentioned to Robin the other week, it was more kind of uncovering versus creating. Like I said, that dark side, which I just mentioned there before, I'd never really seen a productive use for that when I was growing up. And like I said, the spark got lit when I got that message. And obviously recovering and having to just go through, obviously, like I said, when I started, I'd be pushing doing leg press, and honestly it'd go out like 5 centimetres, that was it. And you're going, it's like you're doing a 1 rep max. Every piece of your strength and your leg is going like that. And you know that it's progress, but the baseline that you've already had is full range of motion. So to sit in those spots there and just watch your leg go 10 centimetres and you're squeezing as hard as you can, to have to keep going back to that week after week, like I said, I think you're not creating anything there. You kind of just have to go inside and you need to find something which is going to get you through something like that. It's not like you can get a trainer to come in and help you with that. You know exactly what you have to do. Sit in your wheelchair and you just got to do your exercises. So rather than trying to bring more things in, it was like I kind of had to simplify everything a lot more, and go inside and probably dig into that dark side. And like I said, it's raw, it's untamed energy, which I've been able to find that I've got a channel for it now to focus it in the rehab journey. And I got these braces probably a bit over a year ago now. That was a game changer for me, because everything, I was in a chair for 3.5 years. And finally getting the braces, obviously my legs were still number 9 knitting needles, so there wasn't too much on them. But it's hard work. For the first few times, I think I walked about maybe 50 to 100 metres, and I was in bed for like a week. Obviously I hadn't walked for that long, and you're retraining yourself neurologically. That's nearly just as fatiguing as the muscular pain. And the left leg, I can't feel my left leg, so I'm not sure where it is in space and time when I'm walking. So I've kind of had to relearn to just trust that that's going to land where it's going to land. So obviously I'm retraining, obviously all the neurological side of things. And of course, I've had to build up the physical muscles as well in the leg. Like I'm quite stronger now in the front muscles, like your quads. I've got a little bit of my glutes, but they're quite weak, so really extending tall for me is quite hard. And of course, when you're trying to walking tall is obviously, that's what you want to be doing. But yeah, like I said, I've got a perfect vessel out there now, and probably touching on that dark side, I kind of know how to integrate it now. Found the perfect vessel for it, and like I said, I'm back up walking, and I'm just happy to be sitting here and seeing a good example for my 2 children. So that's pretty much, in summary, the journey that I've had over the last 4.5 years. So thank you very, very much.